Hi, folks, with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about, well, a couple of issues, I guess, but the globalization process as it was kicking off in the 1990s, and the way the globalists were viewing the transfer of jobs, particularly manufacturing jobs, from the West into places like China and India. So what did they prognosticate would be the effect of this quite substantial change in trade? Now, there's been, or trading directions and flows. Now, there's been quite a few videos going around recently that have suggested that no sovereign nation can be a sovereign nation unless it has a recognizable industrial base in particularly the key areas. And in this, we're talking about stuff like steel production, building automotives, cars, and those sorts of things. So, is that a realistic assumption? Well, and twofold: is it a realistic assumption going into the 90s about the benefits globalization would bring? And there are all sorts of propagandists running around, the world is flat and all this kind of thing. And they were all paid propagandists, by the way, to shill for the globalists. But the people like Bill Clinton and all the politicians from that time on, we're even going a bit earlier than that, were very much on board with this idea of if we export Western jobs, because the wealthy West, if we export Western jobs to places like China, this will build up their economy. Then they will be able to buy Western goods and services that they currently can't. China is a poor country. Their per capita wages are peasant wages. So they can't really integrate into the world economy, at least not at anything resembling first world or mid-level status. So we have to build up their economy, and we'll do that by sending Western jobs offshore to China. Now, anyone looking at that is going to say, well, hold on a minute, if you're sending off the Western jobs to China, what's going to happen to the Western people that had those jobs? Now, if we look at the upstream, downstream, and so on jobs, no one knows, I guess, exactly how many jobs are lost, and I don't know if there's been any serious attempt to calculate it. But if you look at the amount of manufacturing jobs that existed when the globalization began and the amount of manufacturing jobs that exist now in, say, the United States or any Western country, then it's pretty much that 3/4 plus of manufacturing jobs were sent offshore to, again, places like China. Now, at the time when this was all going on, I was, a fairly youngish guy working for the corporation, and I was tasked with opening factories and negotiating deals with factories around the world, mainly first world countries, but to produce manufacture locally the products that my company or the company I worked for had designed and invented. So I was across this. I was like, I had a front row seat to this, and so to me it was obvious that the thing wasn't going to work. It was a pipe dream. It was just some ideological pipe dream invented by very highly paid consultants who themselves would not suffer one iota if things went wrong or didn't go as was imagined. Now, it was so obvious to me that it wasn't going to work out, this stealing Western manufacturing jobs and sending off, especially to China. My dealings with the Chinese, there is no way they're going to integrate into the world trading system. There is no way. They want their way or the highway, and they'll take this wealth that they're being handed and given, that they have non-meritoriously been gifted, and they'll use that for developing themselves as a regional superpower, which is exactly what's happened. And now I forecast all this in the late 1990s. I wrote a book about, or even earlier, I wrote a book about it, and I remember Bill Clinton signing the trade deal, and I remember thinking to myself, "Whoa, this is really going to go south big time," which it did. So I wrote a book. So I was so alarmed about it, I wrote a book which I couldn't get a single publisher to touch. they're screed. The memo had gone out, and and if it's unless it talks up globalization trade, if it doesn't sort of gush over globalization trade, then we're not interested, and no publisher would touch it. So, but they they were quite open about it, saying, look, if you want to do a book that says how wonderful globalization and trade is, we're more than happy to look at it. So that was again the memorandum had gone out. So I tried to again deeply concerned back in the day. I thought this is going to be a catastrophe. I've got to do something about this. I thought. So I tried to hire say local government. They've got like a community hall. I tried to hire those and then I had in mind doing a speaking tour where I'd talk about the pitfalls and the dangers and so on, and exhort local manufacturers not to send their jobs offshore and that sort of thing. Now, I didn't have any trouble. If you want to sort of hire the hall to talk about that lesbians are oppressed and there are Nazis everywhere, that's not a problem. You can hire the hall and you get no pushback. But when I tried to talk about the dangers of globalization, the threats, as soon as I said what I wanted to talk about, sorry, the hall's fully booked. And if you want to, anytime you want to inquire, it's fully booked forever. So there was nowhere. Certainly, I could go, and this is pre the social media thing. Nowhere I could go to make the point. Nobody was interested. But it just shows how heavily invested the globalists and deep state were at that time. They were all sort of focused on heading down this path. And there are millions upon tens of millions. I don't know, it could be over 100 million in totality, given again the amount of people employed in manufacturing in the West. I mean, if you look at, say, the Western workforce, there was some in the order of 110 million people that were involved in manufacturing, and this could be also people that say service the lathes and the machines and the equipment, or design the robotics, whatever it might be. Now there would have been natural attrition in manufacturing as companies moved to more mechanization and robotization and so on. And I'd seen the factories in Japan where I was in awe of just how they were using the robots and so on. But Japan, with a very high cost of labor, equivalent if not greater to the West in many ways, they were able to produce cars and export them, quality cars at competitive prices and export them. So obviously it was possible the Germans could do at the time. The Germans could do the same thing. But for some reason in America or Canada or Australia, Britain, it was deemed as impossible. We just can't make cars and we can't manufacture this or that, and that will be sent offshore to China. Now, the economics and the mathematics that they were applying were extremely faulty, and I was able to sort of observe this and again record it. In China, the wages were far less, but given that some in the order of 10% of the total cost of manufacturing a motor vehicle was actually labour, then the relative effect of higher low-cost labour was fairly minimal. Now, if you look at, and I've seen this, if you look at say a Western factory, they're a gazillion times more efficient than an Indian or a Chinese factory ever could be. The mismanagement, the organisation is piss poor, absolutely piss poor, and the productivity rates are through the floor, not high productivity rates. Also, because labour was so cheap in these places, they didn't bother to mechanise in anywhere near the level that it was in the. For example, just dealing with, say, printed circuit boards, the computers. Now there was a lot of mechanisation and robotisation and production line type style handling of printed circuit boards. Yet, the first so-called factory I went to in China, there was just shitloads. I mean, we're talking, as far as the eye can see, people sitting there shoulder to shoulder with soldering irons. I didn't see any mechanisation at all. So the point here, though, is that given the small component that labour did actually play in the cost of manufacturing, then the transferring of jobs to somewhere like China was simply the arbitrage of the wage difference, not because there was better quality workmanship, not because of higher productivity or anything like that at all. Quite the opposite, in fact. And that was one of the key concerns I had. World productivity was going down drastically, not up. It was just simply the wage arbitrage. Now, I had a look at a number of factories in the West that were decided to just give up the whole idea of manufacturing in Australia in this instance, and this was a model or a paradigm that was playing out again in America or Canada or Britain and so on. So I had a look at a few of these and was invited in to consult on a few. Now there's one, this outfit was manufacturing shoes, so it's not high tech or anything. And that is an area sort of in the wider textiles region, which you probably could send offshore, by the way. But nonetheless, just looking at this factory. Now, the equipment that they had was mostly quite old and out of date. And they brought, where they had replaced it and brought in new equipment, the functionality of that equipment, the newer equipment, was such that it couldn't be put into the same machine sequencing, if you like, as the old equipment that it replaced. So they just dotted in with machines here and there, so that the factory was outrageously inefficient. And again, a lot of the plant and equipment, the turning and the lathes or whatever was very very old, and was needing a lot of maintenance. You couldn't even get maintenance contracts on these things anymore. You had to pay by the hour. If it broke down, there was a lot of downtime and so on. So hugely inefficient. But the management had developed over time, become just a bunch of cronies that were just creaming it off the top. They didn't really give a shit. And so they were looking at the business as, well, why don't we just send all this manufacturing offshore? We don't have to care or worry about anything anymore. We don't have any industrial problems anymore. We don't have to worry about maintaining machines or buying new machines or anything like that. So I said, well, look, you can, and there's another guy I was working with who was a bit of a tech geek, so he was more across the technical issues than I was, and he and I said, look, you can actually save this. You can keep your manufacturing here and be very profitable, keep the jobs here and so on, and you can upskill your workforce. You will have to cut some of the workforce, but you've got, I don't know, 250 workers. You're going to have to reduce that, but you'll still be able to keep the business here and keep jobs. Now, they'd moved to some years previous, they'd moved to quite a semi sort of rural area, and this was more a village, and they were the biggest employer in the village, so they closed down. And it had substantial social disbenefits, but they went, nah, can't be bothered, just don't care. And we were going to arrange, or try and arrange, a state and federal government thing where they would get special tax relief. So if they bought a whole, the latest and greatest kick-ass equipment, and then to manufacture the shoes, they could get like total tax write-offs in 1 year. So they wouldn't have to amortize tax write-offs in depreciation over several years, that sort of thing. But they just didn't give a fuck. They weren't, again, they inherited the business. It was kind of a family business, more or less, and they'd inherited it, and they just didn't care. And they were loading up the payroll with their mistresses, the directors, their mistresses and girlfriends, and things like that. So it was cronyistic and corrupt, and I looked at it and thought, well, these people don't deserve to have a fucking business. But they just sent the 250 people lost their job. Everything was closed down. The machinery was so old, most of it was so old they couldn't even get $1 for it. It was just went off somewhere as maybe spare parts or something like that, and that was it. And it was all gone. But what intrigued me was they didn't give a shit, but nobody wanted to help. The government was very lukewarm about it. Well, it's okay if they. So really, everybody was invested in closing down Western manufacturing because it was going to deliver some broader benefit economic benefit, where all boats, the water level will rise and all boats will rise with it. But this was always a pipe dream. The Chinese economy did develop, but they kept the money for building up their military and servicing the needs of their producing locally to meet local demand. There was really no integration into the world economy at all. They artificially boosted exports, using the wealth by subsidising low quality exports so that they'd be super price competitive, and so on, and and effectively were dumping product around the world. So they became anything but a good international trading citizen. Quite the opposite, in fact, as indeed India has been. So India has the thing: if you want to trade with us, you have to take our surplus population, otherwise no trade. So it's hardly a desirable deal, and nor has it been with China. So the whole thing has failed and failed horribly, but the West has lost its manufacturing jobs. Now, the reality is, if the West invests heavily in high-skilled workers and invests heavily in the latest technology, and maybe this technology is yet to be developed in this area, robotization technologies, there's a concerted effort to substantially reduce the price of energy, electricity, then Western manufacturing not only can be viable, but will be a strategically valuable, will create jobs, will do a whole lot of things. So there needs to be, I would argue, a complete, if not total, reversal of sending Western jobs offshore. It either hasn't worked at all, or it's worked counterproductively to Western interests and Western society. And look at the Rust Belt in the US, for goodness sakes. So this is something that I think is an urgent priority, and it's something that, as far as I can tell, the administration of President Trump is addressing. Being with Tacitus today, your pushback channel. Thank you for listening.